Welcome to the Higher Power Podcast, presented by Higher Power Sports PT, the show dedicated to helping active individuals like you unlock your full potential through expert insights on injury prevention, performance enhancement, and recovery. Kurt Kessler is a board-certified specialist in sports physical therapy and an athletic trainer. In each episode, he and his guests bring you the latest evidence-based strategies to help you move better, feel stronger, and stay injury-free. Let's learn together.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Higher Powered Podcast. Today is going to be the first AMA or first Ask Me Anything. I know I did a little bit on the Christmas episode, but this is going to be mostly geared towards PT topics. I had a few people submit some questions, and I'm going to go through them here. Actually, all 5 questions that I'm going to hit today, I'll do 6. I'll do 6 questions today. The 6 questions that I do today are all submitted by @CrowProwling on Instagram, also known as Logan Crow, who recorded this episode with me at the beginning of the year. So I'm just going to dive right in, and we're going to see where this takes us. The idea here is I want to talk about some things that people want to learn about or people want to know about. And so I will solicit some questions just so that I can hit on some of those topics. And hopefully this becomes a little bit more interactive as it goes on, and we'll get more variety and different people submitting. So that way we can hit a number of topics. But it's really just a chance for me to answer some questions that are on some people's minds and see how I can help in that way. So let's dive in here. First question: if you could use a time machine, what's the one idea in PT you'd go back and correct or set straight? This is a very hard one, because there has been, just like anything else or any other profession, there's just a natural evolution of things that lead to the current landscape or the current practice. So I thought about this for a while, and it was really hard to come up with an answer. But I think the answer that I'm going to give is I would go back in time and I would have physical therapy embrace blood flow restriction and more strength and conditioning principles. And my reason for that is they have been around for a very long time. Blood flow restriction, I believe research for that started back in the 1920s, so almost 100 years or 100 years plus. And so that has been around. And I listened to a podcast. I wish I remembered the episode that I could give it proper credit, but I was listening to a podcast where they were talking about blood flow restriction, and whoever it was, whatever healthcare professional it was, might have been a strength and conditioning coach, was talking to a PT, and they were like, we were waiting for the day when PT would finally embrace this because it's been around forever. And the term blood flow restriction is very scary for a lot of people because, it kind of sounds scary, but it's really not. If you do it correctly, if you do it in safe ways with safe parameters, it's way more of a benefit than it is a health risk. There's very, very little risk in any negative side effects when you do it properly. And so the reason I chose that is because it has been around for a long time. The PT profession just hasn't embraced it until more recently. And there's just so many benefits for it, especially pre-op and post-op, helping delay muscle atrophy, helping to gain muscle with a lot lower loads, and that's where it's really important after surgery. So I think that's going to be my answer for that. And then I guess I'll touch on the strength and conditioning stuff. I'm kind of straddled between both worlds here, the PT and the strength and conditioning side. But so many people or I'll say in physical therapy, one of the biggest crimes we commit is underdosing our exercises. So if we stuck a little bit closer to some strength and conditioning principles that have been around for a very long time, I think patients would get a lot better results. Number 2, how would your current knowledge of PT change how you approached sports growing up? I really love this question. I actually just did an episode on this recently, or released an episode on this recently, for caring for athletes that do year-round sports. My current knowledge of PT would have changed. I would have sought more guidance with strength training when I was in high school. And when I say that, I don't even necessarily mean like from like a coach, because some coaches are really like athletic coaches, sports coaches. Some are really good with that stuff, and others really aren't. They're just good at knowing the X's and O's of sports. And I answer it that way because the value that strength training brings to an athlete, not only in performance, but in quote unquote injury prevention or just overall wellness, I think is just super important. And I'll tell you a little story about how this kind of, swung the other way and bit me a little bit. When I was in high school and college, I put a lot of emphasis on the mirror muscles, as they call it, anything on the front of the body, pecs, biceps, all that stuff, because that's what you see in the mirror. And those are the muscle groups that make you look the best and whatever. And so what happened was I ended up with a pretty good muscle imbalance where a lot of the muscles on the front part of my body were a lot stronger than the back side of my body. And this led to some really bad mechanics for my shoulder. And I ended up dislocating my shoulder in college. And I would say largely as a result of that muscle imbalance. And, ended up, I needed getting surgery and rehab and going through all of that. And so I think a lot of that could have been prevented with just basic knowledge of strength training, basic knowledge of how to balance exercise, how to balance muscle groups when you're training. So that's one thing. Just like I would have sought someone who had a background in strength training to just like teach me how to do it correctly. And then I think the other thing is just, and I have to say that the landscape of sports when I was growing up is like completely different. So, I can say stuff that would apply to athletes today, but it may not have even applied that closely to myself at that time. But just like overall, I would say just overall wellness and understanding the role that stress plays on our bodies, understanding the role of volume of activity or volume of sports. Again, I was playing two sports in high school, and then in the off seasons, like I was playing every other sport with my friends. So a lot of the overuse stuff didn't necessarily apply to my habits, but in this day and age, like the biggest thing in my PT knowledge that I can share is like we are just running youth athletes into the ground, and even at minimum, reaching out to someone who knows a little bit about caring for athletes can go a long way for people. Number 3, what skill from a previous non-PT job has helped you the most in your current field? When I was, I guess it would have been end of high school, throughout college, and after college, I worked for my dad at Knoebels Amusement Park. My dad oversaw the company picnics and the catering for that. And so I started working like on the lines, like distributing food and stuff like that. And then I got bumped up to like what they call a team captain, or someone who like runs the picnics. We had, a team of 8 or 10 of us who did that. And it really taught me customer service skills. It taught me hard work and long hours. I started at like 5:30 in the morning and would finish at 7 at night. And a lot of credit to my dad, because he could have just been like, okay, picnic seemed to go well, like, good job, here's your paycheck. But my dad put a lot of emphasis on the feedback and the comments that whoever the head of the picnic, whoever the head of the company was for the picnic, he put a lot of emphasis on the feedback, and really challenged me to make an experience, make a positive impact, make some kind of positive impression on those people, go above and beyond what quote unquote normal effort would be, to make sure that they had a great experience. And so I've kind of taken that, and in my athletic training or PT job, like, I do try to go, most of the time, I try to go above and beyond when I'm focused on it, and making sure that the experience is exactly what the customer or the client or the patient hope that it will be, and then try to exceed that. And, now that I'm on my own, in my own business, I really take a lot of pride in that, because, there's nowhere else to pass the blame except for on myself. So the product that I'm putting out for everybody, I take tremendous pride in, and want to deliver that customer service as strongly as I did for my dad. Number 4, what's been the biggest change in your way of thinking since you started? I'll take this as started my career in PT and started my own business. Since I became a PT, my biggest change in thinking, one would be in specificity, and that a lot of that came from my residency training. Just like, nothing bugs me more than the idea of just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. And that really follows in the way that I practice and the way that I treat the people that I work with. Is I don't typically just throw stuff at the wall. If I'm giving you something to do, it's because I've measured it and assessed it and determined that it's completely necessary to reach whatever goal that we set out. So whether that's trying to get an outcome for a patient or a client or an athlete, or just trying to figure out what's going to help them, specificity is a really big one for me. The other thing I would say is strengthening and appropriately dosing exercises. If anybody listens to any of these episodes, this is a recurring theme, is that we just, as a profession, tend to underdose our patients in terms of we don't make them work hard enough to make a big enough change for them. And so that's another big thing. And then I think the last thing I'll touch on for this is all the factors that go into either injury or recovery or whatever for somebody's well-being. We're talking about like lifestyle, nutrition, their sleeping, their training habits, their training beliefs, stress levels. So there's just so many things that go into either pain or just injury in general, and trying to not just focus on the quote unquote injury itself or the injured tissue itself, but trying to incorporate everything from what I know contributes to well-being and pain and perception of all of that, to not just make a small difference, but actually make a big lasting difference for whoever I work with. And, you asked me this question in a year from now, and my answers might be completely different, because I'm trying to learn something new every day. And so my thinking and my thought process is constantly evolving around these topics. But since I started, I would say those are the biggest things. All right, number 5. This was the most challenging question I got in this section here. So, what's the hardest lesson you've learned? And when I thought about this, I'm going to split it into 3 different avenues of my life. The hardest lesson I've learned. Words, and I'll also say actions. Words and actions affect more than just me. And I think back, especially when I was an immature young man, there are things that I said to people, things I said to my sister, things I said to friends that were just not nice things. And what were either words of immaturity or words of anger or words of whatever, they affect more than just me. They affect anybody who hears them. They affect the person I'm speaking to, anybody within earshot to, be a part of that conversation. And some of those things still sit in the back of my mind and they haunt me a little bit. So I do try to be very intentional with my words, but there are either other times that, I would say something innocently or make a comment here or there, and meant nothing by it, but the person receiving it perceived it in a much different way. And so I do try to be intentional with my words, but a lot of the times they just kind of come out. And then as soon as they come out, I'll evaluate them for what they are. When I make decisions in life, I'm often feel, think, act. But a lot of times when I speak, it's act, think, feel. And that has led to some uncomfortable interactions, or at least some lasting impressions in my mind where, my words did not really reflect the person that I want to be. Another avenue, I'll say, another hard lesson that I've learned is patience, and learning that almost everything in life, or I should say almost nothing in life, happens on my timeline. And, whether that's getting into PT school, whether that's, whether that's PT school, whether that's starting my own business, whether that's anything in life, that kids, whatever, nothing ever happens on my timeline. And even when I have what I think is the best plan, usually I'm reminded that God has a different plan, and it ends up being way better than anything that I could have ever imagined. I've outlined a lot of this on the faith and practice side of the show. But, that's a common theme that keeps coming up. And I wouldn't say it gets any easier over time, but I would say that I am more aware of it. I'm a little bit more accepting of variance and when things don't quite go my way. But yes, at certain times in my life, that was an extremely hard lesson to learn. And the last one I'll touch on here is in the PT world. One of the hardest lessons that I've learned is that I have way less control than I want to believe, and that I can't get everybody better. There are still patients, either from when I first started my career or even existing in my business here. There are patients that, they came to get out of pain, they came to overcome an injury, and I couldn't get them there. And on one hand, it's not a bad thing, because those are the cases that really stick out to me and help me to learn. They drive my learning and my growth. But it's super uncomfortable to, be honest with somebody and say that even though I tried my best, I still couldn't get you the result that you were looking for. And that when I say having way less control, one, I could come up with the most perfect plan for somebody that could get them better, but either things happen in their life that contribute to them not being able to do it, or, everybody makes their own decisions. They could choose not to, take my advice or my guidance. And they might not get the result. So even if I have the perfect plan, they still might not reach their goal because of other factors or other circumstances. And then more commonly, I don't have the perfect plan. I usually have pretty good ones because I'm not a perfect person. But even with that, there are just things beyond my control that influence people's recoveries. And there are things beyond my control in the form of I am just not perfect. And it really burns me up when I can't get everyone better. And then the last question I will do today. Do you think if you started training your body smarter from an earlier age, you would spend less time on the ground during basketball? Okay, so like I said, these questions are from Logan. He is my best friend. The background to this is in youth basketball. I had quite a reputation for landing on the floor or drawing fouls or being on the floor more often than I was standing up. And so that's just his way of getting a little digging at me. And my response to anybody watching this visually, here's my response to Logan. Anybody who watches Friends will get that reference. All right, that's going to do it for today's episode of the Ask Me Anything. I will record another one here shortly with the rest of the questions that I got. If you would like to submit a question, you can find ways to do so in the show notes. Email's in there. Instagram handle is in there. You can find me on Instagram at Higher Power Sports PT. I would love to know whatever questions you have or whatever ways I can just help answer questions or give you a resource to answer the things that you're thinking about. So that's going to be it for today's episode. Find me on Instagram, and we'll see you next time.
That's a wrap for today's episode of the Higher Powered Podcast, presented by Higher Powered Sports PT. We hope you gained valuable insights on how to stay strong, move better, and prevent injury, all backed by expert knowledge in sports physical therapy and athletic training. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. Your support helps us bring more evidence-based tips and strategies to active individuals just like you. For more resources or to connect with us, head over to hpsportspt.com. That's hpsportspt.com. Remember, you've got the power to perform at your best. Keep training smarter, recovering faster, and living stronger. Just a reminder that the content shared in this podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. It should not be considered medical advice. Always consult with a qualified healthcare professional before making any changes to your health or treatment plan. Thanks for tuning in. We hope to see you next time on the Higher Powered Podcast.